So I've hit start streaming. Gonna let my stream load up. I pulled it up here. Good, I have audio. Okay, gonna mute that now. I just needed to know that I had audio, because apparently I spent 4 hours on Thursday editing the decks, and my microphone had come loose. And I did not know that, because I can't see my microphone thing when I have the Word documents open because of the way I have it set up. I have it covering the lower part of my OBS, which is where I would be able to see the audio mixer and whatnot. So, yeah. Okay, I'm just double checking, making sure that I actually have audio this time, because now I'm going to be paranoid about that every single time. So, everybody who streams and everybody who does video content has at one point or another had a large thing that they were working on that they put a ton of effort into just go completely sideways by some dumb little thing. And of course it happened to me during what I think would be the most interesting part of this series, which is the actual selecting of the cards from the list. Once I have the entire list in front of me, what cards, am I actually going to run out of these, 300 that we've selected? So, of course, on the final video, and I was so proud of myself, I did the whole thing, and I got to do my fun video, and there's not a single word of dialogue, so all it is me cutting things off of the list. It also ruined, I did a draft afterwards with New Capenna, since we were doing a flashback to New Capenna for, before the Alchemy rebalancing version of Alchemy Baldur's Gate came out. Alright, so anyway, so I have an hour before I have to go get my brother to bring him to work, and what I have done is I brought up the original build for the Beamtown Bullies and the final build for the political version. There are only 10 cuts left to make in the cutthroat version, and for the most part, I think the last 10 cuts are kind of brutal, and there's logic behind each one of them. But it was mostly just me agonizing over which versions of certain cards, out of all of my removal spells, do I need this one? And I wound up cutting a couple more of those to make room. I wound up cutting the 3 signets and putting in Felwar Stone and adding Coalition Relic back to the list, because I wanted mana rocks, but I also wanted to make room. So, for the political version of the Beamtown Bullies, and then I have the original document from roughly where I was when I finished, that has all of the cards. So, I'm just going to take this hour to go over most of the cuts that happened, and explain why these cards got cut from the deck, and that's going to be the entirety of this particular thing. So that way you have why these cards got cut, because it's really easy to just cut cards and get it down to 60 without any rhyme or reason. I think the most interesting thing about this, as something like why you should watch this, is why I picked these cards. So of course all of that got cut out, and I am never not going to be angry about that, but we are going to go over it now. So out of all of the cards in Alpha Beta Unlimited, the unique cards, Wheel of Fortune, Soul Ring, the Dual Lands, and Demonic Tutor stayed in. So, Berserk, and by extension, Temur Battle Rage, and the other cards that allow the creature to do a lot of damage by boosting up large creatures that we're giving away and forcing to attack. They're all one-shots. They all don't guarantee killing the opponent or anything, for the most part, unless the opponent's already low on life. They are not necessary, and we needed to make room. So every single one of those got cut. So Berserk, Temur Battle Rage, there's one other one that came out in one of the M sets that doubled the creature's power and gave it trample. It might not even give it trample, it might have just doubled the creature's power. All of those got cut. Hypnotic Spectre, along with most of the Saboteur creatures, wound up getting cut. Illusionary Mask, we wound up cutting most of the ones with debilitating comes into play abilities, and because of that, we no longer needed Illusionary Mask and the Scroll of Fate, or whatever it's called, the commander card from the Manifest slash Morph commander deck from... it was based on one of the Khans of Tarkir creatures. It wasn't Sidisi, it was like one of the other ones, though, that cares about morph creatures. So that one had the Scroll of Fate in it. It was like the Sultai deck. So all of those got cut for the same reason. So all of the Manifest cards, again, got cut, similarly to the other build, the more cutthroat version. We did cut Maze of Ith for the same reason we cut it from the other deck. By the time we need to control who deals damage to who and whatnot, like, we don't need Maze of Ith. Like, if we're going to give our opponents one of the more lethal creatures, we can either do it to them on their upkeep if it's going to be like Leveler, so that way it kills them during the draw step, or after combat during main phase 2 in order to do the same thing from the comes into play ability. Like, we don't have to give it to them in a way that they can never attack us with it. So we didn't need Maze of Ith. We did add Felwar Stone, like I said. Despotic Scepter made the cut. I cut all of the lore creatures, so Elvish Bard, Akron Assassin, and Breaker of Armies. All got cut. Akron Assassin had the longest time on the list because it guarantees killing a creature the defending player controls every time. And the idea is that you give these to the player and they can attack with all of their things, and the lore creature stops the opponent from blocking anything other than the lore creature, unless they can kill it before blockers are declared. So they're just kind of underwhelming outside of that. Like, the Elvish Bard went first because it's only a 2/4, but then the 1/1 Death Touch and the 10/8 both wound up going also, because they are just kind of not doing enough. Like, we give them away, and it gives the opponent a clean attack if they want it, and this is the more political version of the deck, which is why the Akron Assassin stayed in as long as it did, but ultimately, they aren't necessary. Phyrexian Warbeast is emblematic of the minorly annoying creatures. Every single one of these got cut also. So Phyrexian Warbeast, Ruinous Minotaur, the one from a Monkhet that makes the player discard a card when it comes into play, the 3/3 Sculpt that makes a player discard a card when it comes into play under their control, Ugin's Construct that makes them sacrifice a colored permanent. All of these things got the axe. They're mildly annoying, but they're not doing nearly enough to the players that we're giving them to hurt them. And since this is the more political-minded version of the deck anyway, they all wound up getting cut. I also cut Worldly Tutor and Sylvan Tutor, and Gamble. I cut all of the tutors except for Demonic and Vampiric. Because I don't think the deck actually needs them for what it's trying to do. If it wants to tutor, it more likely wants to tutor the card directly into the graveyard. So all of the tutors that don't get any card wound up getting cut. So did the Imperial Seal, because it's the weakest out of the get anything tutors, and we don't have enough card draw in the deck to merit the Imperial Seal. And it's such an expensive card to begin with that I don't mind cutting it from the deck because I don't think it's doing what we need it to. We wound up cutting a lot of the creatures like Necrotal and Uktabi Orangutan. We kept a couple of them in the deck, but not these two. So I'm going to go back to the political build now and scroll down a bit. So yeah, we only kept Vampiric Tutor out of Visions. So we wound up cutting most of these. The ones that I left in I left one of the ones in that can't target the Beamtown Bullies, I believe, because I believe it was Shriekmaw for the non-black claws. But I left in Noxious Gearhulk because I wanted to leave in one of the ones that kills a creature, like any creature. Because we're being more political, we can give away a Noxious Gearhulk and expect it to kill something other than our Beamtown Bullies a lot of the time. So I was okay with leaving that particular one in there. Buried Alive stayed in. We wound up cutting all of these cards. Infernal Tribute also got cut from the aggressive version. We have enough sack outlets that I didn't feel like we needed Infernal Tribute. And it was not one of the cards that, out of all of the sack outlets, it wasn't one that we super needed. Thundermare got cut. Thundermare, when it comes into play, it taps all other creatures and is a 5/5 haste. I cut this one and the Shrieking Mog because, similarly to the lore creatures, it stops the opponent from being able to block the other things. Like, if we gave them Thundermare and then we, gave them Master of Cruelties also, they would have to attack with Master of Cruelties then and put the other player to 1 because they have no blockers. Because if they attack with Thundermare, they're not maybe they can attack with Thundermare still, because the Master has to attack alone and both of them are compelled to attack. I think you're required to attack with the Master and then that cuts off the Thundermare. But maybe because you're also required to attack with the Thundermare, you can attack with it only, because then the Master isn't allowed to attack. But I'm not 100% sure on that particular rules interaction. Either way, it's not doing enough. If we're not giving them 2 creatures, it's only 5 damage, and the Mog is worse at 1 damage. So both of them wound up getting cut. Tranquil Grove got cut for the same reason it got cut from the other one. We don't have very many enchantments, and the handful that we do, I don't need getting destroyed, so... we left in Goblin Bombardment and Wasteland from Tempest. So we go back over here. So we cut all of the creatures that deal a little bit of damage to the player that we give them to, for the same reason we cut all of the minor annoyance, sack a permanent, discard a card, lose some amount of life for it coming into play. So all of these wound up getting cut. So Bellowing Fiend and the Dread Reaper and the Vampiric Spirit, Necro Scudder, all of them got cut for the same reason. They're just kind of underwhelming. Dolphy Embrace, we don't need it to make the creature unblockable. We'll use the other cards that did make the cut. I think only the land and the key, again, were the ones that target creature can't be blocked this turn. So, Rogue's Passage and Key of the City were the only ones that made it through. Death Pits of Wrath falls under the category of it actually discourages the opponent from ever blocking the creatures that we're giving out, because they will lose their creature regardless, unless it's indestructible. And we don't necessarily want to discourage that sort of behavior. If they're willing to block and lose their creature, that's fine. So the Death Pits only work if we want to guarantee that the smaller creatures get through more often, so for the Saboteurs, but we cut most of the Saboteurs from the deck anyway, so Death Pits of Wrath no longer served its purpose. All of the Jackal Pup variants got cut. We could build a deck encouraging the Jackal Pups and encouraging, actually running repercussions and everything, but that requires that the player we give it to has bad attacks against basically the entire table. When you give them one of these creatures and force them to attack with it, what they will most likely do is attack the player that has the lowest power worth of creatures or has no good blocks on the creature that we're giving them. So even though we are giving them a negative creature and we are putting them in a bad place where if they attack like anybody with a large board state, they'll die from the repercussion effect on the Jackal Pup, it requires that everybody be in a position to gang block their creature for this to work. So, yeah, Jackal Pup is not helping that. They just attack the player who has, the control player or the combo player that doesn't have the board state to put, like, 10 blockers on their creature and kill them. That's the one they turn everything sideways at. So, we wound up cutting Grave Pact and Erebos' Intervention. Yes, it gets rid of creatures from everybody else when we are constantly sacrificing a creature on everybody's end step. That is not necessary for what this deck is trying to do, though, and we needed to make room. So both of those enchantments wound up getting cut. Entropic Spectre went the same way as Hypnotic Spectre. Mindless Automaton is not helping us enough. Like, it allows us to discard the creatures we draw that we want in the graveyard, and then lets us draw more cards later on. And that's good, but it's not quite enough. And we had better things for that. And on top of that, if we give it away, the person we give it to can just draw a card with it without ever having to attack with it if they don't want to. I would prefer if we let them draw the card, dealt them a damage or two by doing that, and then force them to attack one of the other players. So, Mindless Automaton got cut. Shattering Pulse went the same way that it did the first time, in that we had other artifact destruction that I decided to go with. Still perfectly valid if you want to replace one of the artifact destruction spells we did stop on. Survival has to stay in the deck. I went on a bit of a rant about Survival back when I guaranteed that I was going to make the cut in the Cutthroat version, and everything I said there still holds true. It is one of the best enablers for this deck, allowing you to tutor for the cards that you want and put them into the graveyard. Brand got cut. It just does too little. It's a one-shot way of regaining control of one of our creatures. I need the land or the Saurian more, and one-shot is just not good enough. Like, even if it drew us the card while being cast for 1 red, it wouldn't be good enough for this deck. We don't have the room to spare for it. Dark Hatchling got cut for the same reason as most of the other creatures. Like I said, we just stayed with Shriekmaw as the one that can't kill the Beamtown Bullies when it comes in, like destroy target non-black creature. That is the only one that made the cut, I believe. Flesh Reaver, same thing as Jackal Pup, isn't doing enough a lot of the time. Guarantees 4 damage to the player we give it to, unless there's a Planeswalker they can attack. I believe Flesh Reaver doesn't its triggers dealing damage to an opponent or a creature specifically. So dealing damage to a Planeswalker would theoretically let them get around taking the 4 damage. Every other situation involves them taking 4 damage. It's still super underwhelming, so it got cut. Gamble, again, I cut most of the tutors. Gamble is the next most likely one to stay in the deck. Because it works with, like, discarding cards at random still gives us a lot of potential to get cards we wanted into the graveyard there by gambling for them and hoping they're the one that gets discarded, or having a couple in our hand so that way whatever we discard is something we wanted in the graveyard. Outmaneuver, similarly to Berserk, just does not do enough, so it got cut. Let's see. I'm going to go back to the political version because I can't quite remember. So Greater Good did stay in. Attrition did stay in. You'll notice that Memory Jar did not. Memory Jar was one of the very last cuts for the deck, and it was one of the ones that I was least comfortable cutting, but at the end of the day, the other wheel effects that stayed in I thought were better for the deck. then Memory Jar. Memory Jar is an extremely powerful card, just generically. Giving you access to 7 cards and basically milling the top 7 of most players' decks. Like, unless they can actually use 1 or 2 of the spells during the turn that you activate the Memory Jar, they usually wind up just not getting to use any of those cards and they go to the graveyard. So, Memory Jar tends to just give you access to 7 cards for a turn with almost no downside. And while that is incredibly powerful and gives us the ability to put those cards that we don't use that turn that we looked at into our graveyard, which a lot of the cards we have in this deck kind of work better when we can put them in the graveyard. We have other cards that do that then let us keep using the cards afterwards, like the fresh 7 that we drew, while discarding the ones that we wanted to that were already in our hand. So it was one of the very last cuts, but it did not make the original cut for the deck. So there's that. We also wound up cutting, Crop Rotation got cut because it's, we didn't need it to get the Homeward Path. Like, we needed to make cuts. And so I kept the tutors that get everything all of the time, to make it easier on myself in that regard. But yeah, we wound up cutting all of the other tutors, so Crop Rotation fell into that category and got cut because of it. Deranged Hermit was in there for a while as a thing like we can give to our opponents to give them a bunch of blockers. Ultimately, all of those got cut. Deranged Hermit and the Cathari Bomber that sacrifices itself when it deals combat damage to a player, to give the controller 2 1/1s. Both of those were in until the later stages, but both of them wound up getting cut. We wound up keeping creatures that were beneficial, but not as so as these ones. We also wound up cutting all of the Monarchy and not adding in the dungeon exploration, the initiative, which is a thing in and of itself. And I'm not going to have time to get through everything as well as I thought I was going to be, because I only have half an hour left. Alright. So I might have to make this a 2-parter, because I do have to get my brother and let him get ready for work and whatnot, so. Alright, Bloodshot Cyclops, kept a bunch of the other sack outlets, got rid of him. Phyrexian Negator, same reason as all of the other ones that punish the opponent that we give them to. They attack the player that is most vulnerable to it, or that can hurt them the least. So we have to get them into a position where they're definitely getting hurt really bad by it. So it got cut. Like, all the ones where you can do things like that. We cut all the repercussion creatures, all the Jackal Pup effects, so we cut repercussions. Higher Giant made the list. It's a very good effect for making friends at the table. Whoever you give it to doesn't get a land. Everybody else does. I wanted to check and make sure if it was basics or not, but at the time Wizards was doing server maintenance, so I actually couldn't look that up. I believe he does let everybody tutor for any land. So Higher Giant makes the deck. Even if he's not any land, he still makes the deck. He's just a little bit less potent then. But yeah, so Higher Giant made it in. Hunted Wumpus was a bit more skittish about putting this one in, because there are a lot of big, powerful creatures that we are not running that other players are. Shrieking Maw already went over. We cut all of the avatars. They're just mostly big, dumb creatures that are occasionally discounted, and we needed room, so all 3 of them went. Lesser Gargadon doesn't do enough, falls into the same category. Phyrexian Bloodstock is limited to white creatures. Pernicious Deed. This one got cut from both versions of the deck, and that was one of the very last cuts. Pernicious Deed is a very powerful drop it and wipe the board immediately type of card, similar to O-Stone, and the argument was between Deed and O-Stone, whether or not I needed both of them, and whether or not I could afford to get rid of either one of them, and ultimately I decided Deed. While powerful, required more mana investment a lot of the times to kill the same things that O-Stone just gets rid of immediately, with the obvious upside that Pernicious Deed, if you need to get rid of a lot of smaller things, would let us keep our higher end stuff while wiping the board of all the problematic smaller costing things. Ultimately, I decided for the less mana intensive guarantee to wipe out all the higher things effect of O-Stone. But yeah, that was one of the harder cuts, and that was one of the very last cuts in the Cutthroat version of the deck also. So we kept Phyrexian Arena, we kept Entomb, obviously. Phyrexian Arena is one of our utility cards. It just gives us an extra card every turn. Entomb is probably the best card for our first few turns, and one of the best cards we can draw at any point in time during the game, because it would allow us to just smite an opponent almost immediately. Like, we Entomb Leveler, we cast Beamtown Bullies, we pass turn, and we can immediately kill that player, basically. Like, completely take them out of the game. So Soulgorger Org made it, because Soulgorger puts the opponent to 1 life. And even if they get that life back, there's a couple different ways we can kill them in response to that. Also, if we kill the Soulgorger Org or take it back before it's done draining their life, they won't get the life back. Because Soulgorger Org has no number value noted to give back to them. We did cut World Gorger Dragon, though. World Gorger devastates one player, but doesn't take them out of the game exactly. So, while that is a very powerful effect, this is the more political version. Like, World Gorger Dragon definitely made it into the more cutthroat version, because that does just nuke a player, basically. Like, take them almost entirely out of the game for an extended period of time, and makes it nearly impossible for them to claw their way back in. We needed to make room for some of the creatures that are more politically minded, though. Like, we wanted a couple of creatures that just smite the opponent, still, because we want to be able to win the game by the end of it, or to take out the player that is the biggest problem, that has, like, I've gained 10 million life, and I have surrounded myself with all of these things. How are you going to kill me? Well, I'm going to set you to 1 and deal you a damage. And that's the end of you. Or I'm going to exile your entire deck and let you die to decking. Both of those are perfectly valid ways to kill the opponent, like, more so than any of the other cards we can put in to deal similar things. But we needed to make cuts for some of the creatures that we're okay giving away that aren't game-ending creatures, because we need that for the political version. We need to be giving away stuff that opponents are kind of okay that they got. So these are the ones that they wound up getting cut for. So that's why World Gorger Dragon is not in the political build where it is in the other version. Oversold Cemetery got to stay because now we have more creatures that we are okay casting. And we do want to fill the graveyard, so being able to get back a creature every turn is actually more... it's better for this version of the deck than for the other version, where we have a lot of creatures we didn't want to get back necessarily. Decree stayed in as one of our Wrath effects. Leveler, like I said, we kept Leveler and the Soulgorger Org because we need to be able to just smite a player. That needs to still be a thing we can do, even in this version of the deck. Greaves to protect the Bullies. O-Stone, like I said, just barely won out over Pernicious Deed, because I needed something to cut from, and the removal was where we had, like, the most wiggle room once we got down to needing to cut, like, 3 or 4 more cards. So, Eternal Witness stayed in. There are just some things we want to be able to buy back. Also, it's a creature. And we can give it away, like, to players if we can agree on what they should be bringing back and, what they're going to use it for. That's perfectly valid also. Grave Robbers are Graveyard Hate, top, because of the way I build the deck. Lots of fetches, very easy to get card advantage out of top that way, and excellent card selection. Brooding Saurian, part of the main theme where we need to take back our stuff so it doesn't get exiled forever. Damnation as removal, Coalition Relic, like I said, in place of basically 2 of the mana rocks. We got rid of all of the signets, put Coalition Relic back in, and added Felwar Stone. Shriek Maw, Woodfall Primus, catch-all removal, kills any non-creature permanent, and is really good to give away if we're going to grab it back and sacrifice it when, the person we're giving it to agrees what needs to die. Everything got cut up through Zendikar except for Oracle, so let's double check this thing, see if there's any interesting cards. Filthy Cur, same problem as the Jackal Pup. Executioner and a lot of the other Saboteurs got cut. So it's a 2-2. If it goes unblocked, the defending player has to sacrifice a creature. Again, kind of underwhelming. So we wound up cutting it. Ebonblade Reaper. There are a lot of cards from this list that were not quite good enough for the Cutthroat version, but are way too mean-spirited for the political version, and Ebonblade Reaper kind of falls into that category. Whoever we give it to and whoever they attack are both going to potentially lose half their life total. So the Reaper is just a bit too mean for this version of the deck without, doing what we needed to do, which is actually win the game with it. So Ebonblade Reaper wound up getting cut. Krosan Tusker was more for space in the deck than anything else, so it had to go. Mudspawn again, cut all of those, cut all of the Drinker of Sorrow type effects. Did Seaborn Muse stay in? Did we see Seaborn Muse? Did that get cut from this version? Oops. Oh, no, it did not. Okay. I think I glossed over Seaborn Muse. I wound up cutting a lot of the effects that untap the Bullies on other players' turn, or in the same turn that we used it. Patriarch's Seal stayed in because it's Mana Rock also. Seaborn Muse stayed in because when it lives, it gives us access to the Bullies on everybody's turn. So... yeah, I was actually genuinely surprised because I could have sworn Seaborn Muse stayed in, and it did. We cut, the Dragon Tyrant and the Fierce Empath. Big Dumb Creature, tutor, but not as good as the other tutors. Dross Harvester wasn't doing enough. We cut Dross Harvester, Pathracer of Ulamog, and Bane of Balaged. They're just not doing enough to the player that they're attacking. We either have better options or we have better things to give to the players that we want to help out. Oh, I'm sorry, Dross Harvester is not the one that makes them sack 2 permanents. This is just one of the life loss ones. There's another one further down that got cut that makes them sack 2 permanents when it deals damage to them. That is the one I was thinking of. This one is just another one of the life loss ones, and all of those got cut also because they're not doing enough. Gilded Lotus normally makes my decks. Didn't for these two. I have cheaper mana rocks than that, and I wanted them... this one produces colored mana, so it had a better chance of staying in. But ultimately, I chose cheaper mana rocks over the potential mana explosion that a Gilded Lotus gives you, going from 5 to 8, maybe 9 mana on the following turn. Grid Monitor was silly, but not good. We give it to a player, they can't cast creature spells that turn until they get the Grid Monitor off of the table. We cut a bunch of the things like Rustmouth Ogre. I think the Kappa was the last one to get cut. We're just either going to give one of our big comes into play, destroys an artifact or enchantment things away, or we're going to give away something else that deals damage and destroys things. Rustmouth Ogre just got cut. Because Solemn got cut, and at first it was excruciatingly painful. Later on I realized that we only have room for 6 to 8 basic lands in the deck. Which dramatically diminishes the power level of Solemn Simulacrum if we can only get a couple lands with it before we're out. So I feel less awful about cutting Sad Robot, but at the time, I'm just thinking, I almost never cut Sad Robot. Like, it's in almost every one of my commander decks. And the ones that is not in, yes, tend to only have, like, 5 to 7 basic lands in it. Sylvan Scrying got cut for the same reason the other tutors did. Stylus is just horribly underwhelming. Even when I picked it, I said, we probably won't need this. I would rather have Despotic Scepter and, like, the Homeward Path Saurion combo. Eater of Days actually got cut from the political build for the Bullies for the same reason that I cut some of the other ones that are a bit surprising. It's in there to... yeah, I'm like all the way down here. It would have been up here. It doesn't do enough to kill the player. It just makes that one player very miserable. Eater of Days is much better in the Cutthroat version, where we choose a player that's too far ahead and we just stop them from participating in the game for a while. But Eater of Days does not work in the political version of the deck as well, so it wound up getting cut. There's the Greater Harvester. They sack 2 things when it does its thing. Again, underwhelming overall. Reap and Sow as a tutor and land destruction spell, neither one was really what we needed for the deck, and I needed to make room, so... yeah, it was one of the first ones to get cut as a way to tutor up Homeward Path, and I wound up cutting all of the other ones too, so that should tell you how unlikely Reap and Sow was to make it in the deck. Beacon of Unrest, good card, generically. Not what we're really all about, so wound up getting cut because it's only doing good stuff and nothing on topic. But it wasn't fulfilling a role either, like Graveyard Hate or Card Advantage or anything that we could, or Permanent Destruction. It reanimates a creature or an artifact from an opponent's graveyard. Generically good, generically good and powerful card, not what we needed. Just does a little bit of damage, got cut. Same reason as all the other ones. Golgari Guildmage got cut because we had better sack outlets. Necroplasm got cut because it kills tokens very well, and that's a useful effect, but we have other board sweepers that we can use that will also kill most tokens, not necessarily all of them. Some of them will be big enough to survive a lot of our board sweeper effects. So yeah, and the Dredge wound up not being enough to merit putting in. Phalanx is just a way to kill a player that has a lot of tokens, or a strong go-wide strategy. So we didn't need that one. Perilous Forays, we had other options for sack outlets again. Bronze Bombshell stayed in the Cutthroat version because we can give it to them, and if we can untap the Bullies, we can give it to them multiple times in a single turn to deal them a lot of damage. The political version has its ways to kill the opponent. Bronze Bombshell would have been too slow, but would have looked a bit too intimidating over the course of a couple turns of killing somebody. That might have made us, or just it in the graveyard, a target to stop us from giving it to somebody repeatedly. So Bronze Bombshell, while making the Cutthroat version, also did not make it into the main deck. Stomp Howler, we wound up cutting. It was one of the last Destroy an Artifact or Enchantment cards that did get cut. So only the lands made it through this version of the deck. Jagged Poppet, again, requires that there be an opponent that you can attack that's going to block it, deal a bunch of damage to it, make you discard your hand. Magerite Stone, we cut a bunch of these, like Magerite Stone, Thousand Year Elixir, Manifold Key. All good at what they do, like giving us extra activations out of the Bullies. All not quite good enough. We needed to make room, and they were just win more cards a lot of the time. Especially when we cut a bunch of the creatures where we would need to activate the Bullies twice in a turn to really take advantage of the creatures we were giving them. Stalking Vengeance. decent card. We're going to have a bunch of our stuff dying, and some of it's going to be big. Still just okay. 7 mana, 5/5, wound up getting cut. War's Toil, too obnoxious without necessarily doing what we needed it to do. So we cut that. Evil Eye, similar to the Grid Monitor, we give it to a player, they can only attack with the Evil Eye, and they have to attack with it, so they can't, attack with their other creatures. More of a meme than anything. It's funny to do to players, but it's not necessarily good. So, wound up getting cut. We cut the Incendiary and Primal commands. Did not have enough room for them. They're versatile, but none of the modes are super important to the deck. So they wound up getting cut. Rings of Bright Earth, similar to any of the other effects that allow the Beamtown Bullies to be activated multiple times. Copying their activated ability, still not quite good enough. So Rings got cut, 1,000-Year Elixir got cut. Cremator's not doing enough. The Deus isn't really doing enough. Yes, we can cast it. If it gets through for damage, it makes the defending player sacrifice a land. Or if we pump it high enough, then it will trample over for 6 or more damage to destroy land. Not good enough. Torment, similarly to Death Pits of Wrath, giving everything Wither makes blocking less appealing, because it cripples the creature that does the blocking and eating, and makes it do less damage over time, and puts it closer to dying. So that discourages blocking the creature, so that way they die and get back into our graveyard. Tattermunch Witch, same thing as a lot of the other things. We needed to make room. It gives out trample. That's great. We needed room. And it's not doing nearly enough. Wound Reflection was actually one of the last cuts from this version and made it into the other version. Wound Reflection interacts very well with cards like the Soul Gorger Org and the Demon, the 1/4, when it gets through, the opponent's life total goes to 1. That being said, we needed to make room, and Wound Reflection is definitely a lightning rod, both for itself, its own effect, and for you for having it. Because it affects all opponents, they are very incentivized to kill you before they are dealt damage and wind up losing additional life based on the damage that they're dealt. So Wound Reflection actually got cut from this version, where it made it into the other version. Hang on, because I think we're getting to some of the more interesting cuts down here. Shadowmoor. Yeah, so we wound up cutting all of the Tutor to the Graveyard effects, like the more expensive ones, so Corpse Connoisseur and the Lamaya and whatnot, because we needed to make room. Violent Ultimatum was also one of the very end of the thing cuts. I believe it also got cut from the Cutthroat version. It's powerful. 3 permanents is still a lot. I put only 3 permanents because I always want this thing to destroy 4 permanents for some reason. I always want it to be Decimate but better. And it's not. It got cut because we have other cards like Casualties of War already in the deck. And I needed to make room. This was one of the very last cuts from the Cutthroat version, I believe. I don't think it survived the Cutthroat version either. And it got cut from the political version for much the same reason, is that we just needed room and we had plenty of other removal spells. So Violent Ultimatum wound up going away. Extractor Demon got cut. It's okay, but ultimately underwhelming in the deck. Just as a way to self-mill. The other demon, the Surveil Demon, I think made it into this version of the deck. We'll double check when we get lower. Deadshot Minotaur, underwhelming. This is one of the ones that went in there early, but wound up being not as good as I thought it would be. It cycles and only damages flyers and only does 3 damage, so it's a lot easier to play stuff that it can't kill, even if the other opponent wants it to. And we can cycle it to put it in the graveyard. It's still bad. So it got cut. Cathari Bombers, I mentioned. Lord of Extinction, big dumb creature, usually kills a player when it connects. So it got to stay in there for a while. Ultimately, we ran out of room for it, though, and we had better options for things to give away than a creature that I basically have to make unblockable or give trample for it to do anything other than get chump blocked or eat a removal spell. Maelstrom Pulse, sorcery speed. Its extra effect only works if you're targeting tokens or if everybody has a copy of the card that you wanted to blow up. So 2 players or more have to have, their own copy in order for that to get more than one card. And we had a bunch of other instant speed cards that dealt with wide varieties of permanents, and a bunch of other sorcery speed cards that could deal with multiple permanents. So Maelstrom Pulse ultimately had to go just to make room. Expedition Map got cut. Oracle stayed in as a card advantage engine. We have a lot of deck manipulation with all the fetch lands, so it's very easy to get multiple lands in a turn with Oracle of Moldiah. And that gets multiple lands out of our decks and digs us to better cards, or at least lets us know what's coming up, so that way we know if we need to shuffle and we don't have a top available. And works very well with top also, so Oracle gets to stay. Ruinous Minotaur, way too little. Abyssal Persecutor falls into it's a cute trick, but it's not actually doing anything cool other than being a 6/6 Flample. Mordant Dragon, not doing enough, only killing one creature if it gets through. Hellcarver, both dangerous if you hit multiple combo pieces for the player, or give them enough of a board state afterwards where they're not actually dead. So it's very random if it kills people. And World Gorger Dragon, I think, is just doing Hellcarver Demon's job better, and we cut World Gorger Dragon towards the end. So, Thought Gorger got cut from this version. It's a very mean card, and very useful in the Cutthroat version, but for the same reason, that's why it didn't make it into this version, is it's more mean than either winning or doing what this deck wants to do, so Thought Gorger wound up getting cut. Ooze wound up not doing anything. We put a bunch of cards into our own graveyard. I thought maybe Necrotic Ooze, but by the time we were done building, no, it doesn't have anything that it does that's really good. Steel Hellkite, not quite good enough. Wound up getting cut. Dark Steel Plate and Into the Core stayed in to protect our things, and as our artifact removal. Massacre Worm actually got cut from the political version of the deck. We kept in the dragon that when it attacks, it deals 6 damage to all of the opponent's creatures. The Balefire Dragon, 6/6 flyer. So it's not when it attacks; it's when it deals damage to a player. We left that one in instead because it's more political minded than the Massacre Worm, which just kills all the little things. And we were looking for more cuts, and we needed to make room for other things. Phyrexian Obliterator falls into the same problem as a lot of the ones. They just attack the player that can take it. More so, they attack the player, and they will just take the 5 damage because they don't want to lose permanence to Phyrexian Obliterator by dealing damage to it. And it's going to go away at the end of the turn and force me to come up with another way to put it back into play, or wait until we can put it back into play. So yeah, it's basically just 5 damage, and that's super underwhelming. There's Balefire Dragon stayed in. Essence of the Wild, weird, cute trick card, not exactly what we needed. Splinter Fright's not milling us enough. Curse of Bloodletting only hates on one player. Machaeus is terrible for the deck. I forget why I even considered putting him in. Vorapede, not doing nearly enough. Woodfall Primus gets in because it does a whole lot, and then we can steal it back and do a whole lot more. Vorapede is not doing anywhere near that much, despite coming back. We give it away, it dies in combat, or we grab it back and sacrifice it, and we get a 6/5 Trampler with Vigilance. That's okay, not great. Malignus got cut for the same reason as Lord of Extinction. Reforge the Soul, I believe, got cut. I want to check. Yeah, we cut a bunch of the wheel effects and wound up only running like Wheel of Fortune and I believe the Ruin Grinder still made it in. I have to double check that. But yeah, we wound up cutting a bunch of cards like that. So while Reforge the Soul was in there for a very long time, eventually it wound up getting cut for the same reason that a bunch of the other wheels did, like Memory Jar, in that we needed them less than I thought we would when looking at the deck. Gerard's Orders, a bunch of the... We already cut the Gravebreaker Lamaya and the Corpse Connoisseur, and I think they're better than cards like Gerard's Orders, so... World Spine Worm. We have to discard it on the opponent's turn and respond to the trigger in order to give them the thing. And then if it dies while they control it, they get a bunch of 5/5 tramplers. All in all, it was too good, I think, and too much of a pain to actually get to somebody in time. And we are not going to want to cast this 11-drop most of the time. So, Burning Tree Emissary. There were a bunch of cards that I had that would give the opponent a quick boost of mana. All of them got cut except maybe the Zenarim Spy, I think is the last one, where when they attack they can pay a life and make a treasure once per turn. That one I believe is the only small mana boost that I left in the deck. The Can Attack or Block alone was kind of a fun, again, cutesy trick, but not good enough, so all of those got cut. Gore Clan Rampager got cut because the Bloodlust or the Blood Rush ability is very similar to why I was running cards like Berserk, and they all got cut, so did he. Gruul Charm had one of those I gain control of all permanents I own bit of game text, so that's why it was in consideration, and it had two other okay effects. Ultimately decided not to run it though, because it's, again, underwhelming for that effect. Bracers, similarly to the other copying effects for Beamtown Bullies, wound up getting cut. Rust Scarab, not doing enough. The player can just take the 4 damage and not have one of their artifacts or enchantments destroyed. Did we cut Master of Cruelties? I think we did. Yeah, Master of Cruelties did get cut. Stayed in the Cutthroat version of the deck, but yeah, got cut from this version for just being mean enough in the Cutthroat version, where it's actually going to win the game when we give it out, to too mean without necessarily winning the game kind of thing. Like, it actually has to get through unblocked, so we have to make it unblockable. Yeah, it feels like too mean of a card without winning us the game immediately type of deal. So it wound up getting cut for the same reason that a lot of the other ones that are really powerful and made it into the Cutthroat version of the deck didn't make it into this one. Sire got cut for the same reason it got cut the last time. It's good, but it's not really what we're doing. So we don't need the everybody discards their hand thing going on with Sire. Fire Drinker Satyr is just a Jackal Pup with upside. Satyr Piper got cut because we don't need the effect on him. We also cut the thing that destroys a creature that was dealt damage this turn, and all of the like the Jarl type cards that destroy a creature that was dealt damage this turn when it comes into play. Ultimately, I'm just relying on these grabbing our stuff back if it doesn't die and sacrificing it or killing it some other way to reuse the effects. Hero's Downfall, I initially cut Bedevil during one of my cut passes from the Cutthroat version. And I realized afterwards that was really dumb, because we have the mana base that will easily allow us to cast Bedevil 99% of the time, compared to when we can cast Hero's Downfall. So in that regard, cutting Bedevil was a huge mistake. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I talked myself into thinking that, red was going to be our least supported of the 3 colors, so adding red to a double black spell might make it hard to cast. we have a triome, and how many dual lands, like fetchable dual lands that we can get. So yeah, changed it back, fixed it. Heroes Downfall got cut. We cut all the temples because we actually were over on non-basic lands and we needed to make room. So, in order to have some basic lands in the deck, so the temples were among the ones that got cut. Dictate of Erebos, I already mentioned. Ambush Crota not doing enough. And not, like, we could give it to a player to let them save a creature while getting the 5/5. That's cool, but it wasn't good. So Ambush Crota wound up going. Arcbond, same problem as all the Jackal Pup-like effects. That it deals damage to everybody is like Coal Hauler Swan got cut too, so doesn't need to be in there. Archfiend of Depravity wasn't quite good enough, like wasn't doing enough for what I wanted. Cut Breakthrough Line. We cut all of the make smaller creatures unblockable because we're using too many big guys. Cut all of these Manifest cards, cut the Construct. Butcher, Volcanic Rush isn't doing anywhere near enough. Bane of Balaged, no. Already said that. And Breaker. Barrage Tyrant only works on colorless, so we got rid of that one. Hedron Archive we got rid of. Ulamog, very powerful creature. Not really what the deck is about. Chandra, yeah, we cut Hedron Archive. The colorless mana requirements of this deck are actually... We don't need a ton of extra colorless mana for the deck. Because of the way it works. Like, a lot of decks that I build, especially when I'm trying to be more competitive, run tons of colorless mana rocks, because we're going to try to, Mana Vault or Grim Monolith and Mana Crypt into, like, Worn Power Stone and Thran Dynamo and Gilded Lotus, and then untap with, like, 15-20 mana on turn 5. Like, that is a goal for those decks, and then it has ways to use that mana. This deck does not feel like it has enough ways to use that extra mana. And I'm at 130 already, so I'm going to call it for right now, and I'm going to go do what I need to get my brother to work, and then I'm going to come back and we are going to finish going over all of the cuts and why things didn't make it into this version of the deck, because I think that is probably one of the selling points of these videos, is the thought process behind why these cards are getting run and why the other cards aren't. And I really want to go over that. Like, I am super bummed that I lost all of the audio for that 4-hour video. So this one's gonna be faster. It's probably still gonna be around 2 to 2.5 hours. But yeah, so I have to get going for right now, so I'm gonna cut the video here, and I'll be back a bit later for the remainder of it. Thanks for watching.